Was on, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Ross, I like games, and I thought we were done talking about the PS1 Classic. You see, I told you what the first 5 games were going to be and why it wasn't worth buying. Then I told you what the final list of games was and why I was disappointed. Then I told you what the 20 should have been. And then I was like, right, well, that's all I need to tell you about the PS1 Classic. We are done. But no. You see, some lovely people have gone and gotten into the hardware of the PS1 Classic. And it turns out we know what the list should have been. All of these games, I'm going to run you through a list here. All of these games are on the PS1 Classic. Not, they were planned to be included. These are on the system, but are not playable. That's right. These are games which are on the system and could be played, but they were then locked out, so you're not allowed to play them anymore. The people were trying to basically have a look and go, okay, well, the US games generally play at a slightly higher frame rate, so what we're going to do is go in and find the American versions and unlock them so people can have the better frame rate. And what they instead found was a long list of games which are not on the final console. So let's have a look at what was, and in fact is, on the PS1 Classic. Spoiler alert, it's a much better system this way. As a side note, all of the different regions are all included on the same PS1. That just makes it much, much easier for manufacturing purposes. And then they essentially unlock the games for the region in which they're selling. All of these are on, some of them are different regions. So we've got Ark the Lad, which is a role-playing game, which is not on the system that was released. Only the Japanese version, mind you, is on there. We see Armored Core, which is just big giant robots fighting, the Japanese version there. We've got the Japanese version of CHOCOBOS. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Those adorable little creatures from Final Fantasy VII. I assume this means Chocobo's Mysterious Dungeon. COLIN McRae Rally, the European version, that old rally racing game. Cool Borders 2. Which did actually make it onto the final one. Yeah, that's right. Of all the ones we've done so far, this is the first one that actually made it onto the system proper. The European version of that. Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2 for both Europe and US, and the Japanese version of Crash Bandicoot 2. The first 2 Crash Bandicoot games are on the system. You just can't play them. No Crash Bandicoot 3, weirdly, and no Japanese version of Crash Bandicoot, but they're on there. Destruction Derby, both the US and European versions, which did make it onto the system as a whole. Disney's Toy Story 2. Now, I know not everybody has the greatest memories of this. I understand that entirely. But I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, it's a fun platform that a lot of people remember nicely. The EU and US versions of Driver, that action driving game, that was supposed to be on there. The fighting game ARMOURED, and I'm going to be honest with you, I was completely unaware of this, but it's a 3D fighting game and you can apparently play as Cloud. It's only the Japanese version that is actually on there. Fighting Force, that's such an archaic game. The classic scrolling beat-em-up, but, you know, in 3D and for a newer audience. Then, of course, Final Fantasy VII that we know is on there. We see DARIUS, a shoot-em-up, shmup if you will, the Japanese version. GRADIUS GAIDEN, which was another little shoot-em-up there, only the Japanese version making it onto the system. Gran Turismo, this is one of the ones which I argued was a hideous omission, because Gran Turismo is, well, it just is the PlayStation, right? And Gran Turismo isn't on the system. And that makes me incredibly sad indeed. Grand Theft Auto, which of course did make it onto the system as a whole. Intelligent Cube, which made it on. Jumping Flash, which made it on. KAGERO. Now, this was another game where we only got the Japanese version. That's the only one that is supposed to be on here. And KAGERO is an action strategy RPG It's a game I never played, but it's one that looks right up my alley, so I'm going to have to try and track this one down. KLONOA, the 3D platforming game for the PS1, which I know a lot of people fondly remember, both the Japanese, US versions of that. KULA World, the European version of this, made it on there. And KULA World was one of those... It was like a rolling ball game. So it's a 3D puzzle platformer where you played as a ball and rolled them around. Very much in the vein of Marble Madness. I adore Marble Madness. I never played this game, but I feel like I would probably love it. Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, another game, which a lot of people argued very strongly was one of the more iconic PlayStation games and should have made it onto the system. Did, you're just not allowed to play it. Medal of Honor, the shooting game, again, a lot of people thought that should have been on there. It is, but it isn't. Medieval, that weird platformer, which I'm going to be honest, I was never a huge fan of Medieval, but I know a lot of people were. It was more of an adventure hack and slash game than a platformer, really. But either way, a lot of people remembered it very, very fondly. MEGAMAN Legends. The Europe, Japanese, and US versions of MEGAMAN Legends were supposed to be on there. And I know there's a whole bunch of people out there that loved this game on their original PlayStation. People like MEGAMAN. Metal Gear Solid, which we know is on the system, and Mr. Driller, that we know is on the system, as well as Oddworld's ABE'S Odyssey, which is on the system, and then PARAPPA the Rapper. This was, in my opinion, one of the most egregious of the omissions from this system. I think that PARAPPA the Rapper is one of the seminal PlayStation 1 games. I adore PARAPPA the Rapper, and I still play it regularly on my PSP. I was literally playing it last weekend. It's on the system, and you're not allowed to play it, which seems a little bit weird. And another Japanese game I've never heard of, PACAPACA Passion, which is a rhythm game. If you're into that, I'm going to be honest, it looks kind of fun. Parasite Eve. Yeah, everyone loves Parasite Eve. It's another one of those games people just think about when they think about the PlayStation. It's on there, but you can't play it, ladies and gentlemen. Persona, which was one of the weird inclusions, although it is on there. It is playable, you can play it. RAYMAN, which of course is on there and is playable. It's a fun little platformer. I got nothing against RAYMAN. It's just not one of the games I would have put on there. The Japanese version of Raystorm, a scrolling shooter. Yeah, the Japanese players of the PlayStation really love their scrolling shooters. Resident Evil, which of course is on the system, and Ridge Racer. And Ridge Racer Type 4. There are the EU, Japanese, and US versions of both Ridge Racer and Ridge Racer Type 4. Now, to be fair, I did argue that Ridge Racer was not the best one to put on there. I was more of a fan of Gran Turismo. Well, it turns out Gran Turismo and 2 Ridge Racer games are on there. Saga Frontier. Again, this was a Japanese role-playing game. Silent Hill, which I think is one of the seminal PlayStation games. It's survival horror. It's on there. You can't play it, ladies and gentlemen. Street Fighter Alpha 3, a great fighting game, which is on there. Oh no, wait, it's not. They gave us Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo and no Street Fighter games. Also on the system is Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha. As a child, I played a lot of this game. It's a 3D fighting Street Fighter game. It's not a great game as far as I remember, but it's fun and you got to see him in 3D for the first time. And that was good enough for little Wassy. Also, SUIKODEN, I'm probably pronouncing that horrifically, another role-playing game. So you can see quite how many role-playing games were supposed to be on there. Super Puzzle Fighter 2, which we know made the final cut. Tekken 3 and Siphon Filter that we know made the final cut. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six, one of the weirder ones that made the final cut. And then Tomb Raider 1 and Tomb Raider 2. Again, in my What the List Should Have Been video, I will of course link all my other PS1 Classic videos in the description, I told you that making this system without Tomb Raider was weird and silly and you shouldn't do it. Well, they didn't. They just locked us out of them. Only the first 2 on there, but still, the first 2 were on there. As was Tomba. Anyone love Tomba? I mean, it's a platforming game. It wasn't one of my favourites, but again, I had friends that liked it. And you know how I've been talking about these games that really should have been on the system but weren't? Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 were supposed to be on there. Find me a PlayStation fanatic or even casual player from back in the day that never played Tony Hawk's on the PlayStation, and I will be very confused and wonder what they were doing with their time. Of course it should be on the system. It is. You just can't play it. Yeah, that is a bit of a recurring theme. Battle Arena Toshinden, which did, of course, make the final cut. Twisted Metal, which did, of course, make the final cut. Wild Arms, which did make the final cut. I did suggest that there were better RPGs. Some people were unhappy about that. I'm cool with that. XEVIOUS, another scrolling shoot 'em up. And finally, 11. Z, if you'd prefer. This was a game that I know a lot of people do remember very, very fondly. Bit more of a niche one, and it was called Devil Dice when it came over to Europe. And I know I went through the list in alphabetical order. I'm a very silly boy, ladies and gentlemen. I did actually forget a couple as we went down. I'm very sorry, let me fix that now. I said Grand Theft Auto, but it was actually Grand Theft Auto 1 and Grand Theft Auto 2 that were included, as well as a European version of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. That's right. The first Harry Potter game was weirdly on here as well. As well as Mr. Driller, there was the Japanese version of Mr. Driller G, and Spec Ops Stealth Patrol, a third-person shooter which honestly does not seem to be remembered all that fondly. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what the list was supposed to be. I told you before that making a PlayStation Classic without Crash Bandicoot, without Gran Turismo, without Tomb Raider, without Parappa the Rapper, without Silent Hill, without some of the Street Fighter games, without Tony Hawk's, was just silly and shouldn't be done. Well, they didn't. And I want to stress, these games are on the system. You've just been locked out of them. They're on there. They've been loaded. But you've been locked out of them. Which brings me to the question of, why did we only get the 20 we got? Which I'm sorry is a lackluster list. And if there were issues with licensing, so you couldn't get Crash on there and you couldn't get Tomb Raider on there, why load them on there in the first place? This seems very strange to me. There's an outside chance that there's going to be a patch in the future, but remember that this doesn't connect to the internet, so getting that to people would be very strange. These games are on the system you're paying for, you just can't play them. Also, this is over 60 games. This is treble the amount you're allowed to play. Let that sink in for a second. You pay $100 for your PS1 Classic, you're allowed to play 20 games. There are 60 games on the system. That's just wrong. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I was very weirded out by this news and I had to bring it to you as soon as possible. Turns out the PS1 Classic is an awful lot better than it looks, except it's all hidden away and we're not allowed to use it. I think this is where you should probably leave a comment. Tell me which games you really wish were unlocked. Tell me what you think about this. Go nuts in the comment section, ladies and gentlemen. But please do remember the rule. Be nice, would ya? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at @TheWossy for some more Wossy action. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wossy Plays.